George Harrison finally breaks silence on Lewis Collins. George Harrison was born on February 25, 1943 in Liverpool, England. From a young age, George loved music more than anything. Growing up in a simple home, he fell in love with the guitar. After hearing early rock and roll singers like Chuck Berry, Carl Perkins, and Elvis Presley, by the time he was a teenager, he had met Paul McCartney at school, who later brought him to meet John Lennon. Harrison's amazing talent on the guitar quickly got him a spot in their new band, the Quarrymen, which would later become the Beatles. Even though he was the youngest member, his great guitar skills and quiet sense of humor soon made his older bandmates respect him. When the Beatles became hugely famous around the world in the early 1960s, Harrison's special lead guitar style became a huge part of their sound. His use of the sitar and love for Indian classical music brought completely new sounds to Western pop music. Songs like Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown showed his interest in Eastern philosophy, and his later songs, Within You, Without You, The Inner Light, and Love You Too, showed his growing love for spirituality and finding himself. Unlike many other famous musicians who got caught up in fame and partying, Harrison looked for deeper meaning, purpose, and peace in the middle of being a global superstar. As a songwriter, George's growth in the Beatles was amazing. At first, he only got to write 1 or 2 songs per album. His later songs, like While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Something and Here Comes the Sun, were not only some of the Beatles' best songs, but also some of the most loved songs in all of popular music. His songwriting mixed real emotions with beautiful music, often showing longing, faith, and love in deeply powerful ways. Frank Sinatra once famously said Something was the greatest love song of the past 50 years. This showed Harrison's ability to write songs with both deep feeling and messages everyone could relate to. After the Beatles broke up in 1970, Harrison stepped out from behind the others to show just how creative and powerful he really was. His triple album, All Things Must Pass, is still one of the greatest solo albums in rock history, mixing deep spiritual thoughts with big, beautiful production. Songs like My Sweet Lord and What Is Life showed both his devotion to Eastern spirituality and his lasting hope about human connection. My Sweet Lord in particular was a worldwide hit that perfectly mixed pop and religious music, a musical prayer that touched millions of people. Beyond his solo music, George Harrison became a leader in using his fame to help people in need. In 1971, deeply upset by the suffering caused by the Bangladesh Liberation War, he organized the Concert for Bangladesh, the first major charity concert in history, bringing together famous musicians like Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, and Ringo Starr. The event raised millions of dollars and inspired future generations of artists to use their fame to help others. Harrison's humble nature made sure that his charity work never seemed like he was bragging. He simply saw it as the right thing to do. Spiritually, Harrison's life was a never-ending search for truth. His deep connection with Indian mysticism and his lifelong friendship with sitar master Ravi Shankar opened new doors in Western music and culture. Harrison's spiritual beliefs influenced everything he did, from his music to his friendships to the way he handled fame. He often said, "Everything else can wait, but the search for God cannot." This showed his belief that inner peace and spiritual awakening were the true signs of success. In his later years, George stayed a private and thoughtful person. He liked the quiet life of gardening at his Friar Park estate better than the constant spotlight of being famous. But even in his private life, his humor and kindness showed through. His final album, Brainwashed, released after his death in 2002, showed his lifelong faith and grace, offering messages of love, humor, and acceptance. George Harrison's romantic life was as exciting and interesting as his music, filled with deep love, heartbreak, spiritual searching, and lasting companionship. His marriages to Pattie Boyd and later to Olivia Arias each showed different times of his personal growth and artistic change, showing how love and relationships shaped his journey from the craziness of Beatlemania to the peace of his later years. In 1964, during the peak of Beatlemania, George Harrison met Pattie Boyd, a beautiful young model who had been cast as a schoolgirl in A Hard Day's Night. Harrison was immediately attracted to her beauty and charm. According to Boyd, George leaned toward her on set and asked shyly, "Will you marry me?" A question that would come true 2 years later. They married in January 1966 at the Epsom Register Office in a small and intimate ceremony with close friends and Harrison's parents. At that time, George was not just one of the most famous musicians in the world, but also one of its most spiritually curious people, looking for meaning beyond fame and fortune. Patty became his closest companion through this life-changing period. Their marriage happened during some of George's most creative years with the Beatles, and she was both his inspiration and his confidant. Patty's influence was captured forever in several famous songs. George wrote "I Need You" and "Something" for her, with "Something" being one of the Beatles' most beloved love songs, praised even by Frank Sinatra as the greatest love song of the past 50 years. However, life as the wife of a Beatle was far from easy. Constant touring, the pressures of fame, and George's growing obsession with Indian spirituality began to create emotional distance. Patty later remembered he was so withdrawn at times, as if his mind was somewhere far away, chasing something he couldn't quite reach. As the 1970s began, the problems in their marriage got worse. George's devotion to meditation and Hindu philosophy sometimes left Patty feeling neglected, while his involvement in affairs with other women, most notably with Ringo's wife Maureen, made things even worse. At the same time, Patty found herself attracted to George's close friend, guitarist Eric Clapton, who fell deeply in love with her. Clapton's one-sided love for Patty inspired the classic song "Layla," a desperate plea for her love. The emotional love triangle between Harrison, Boyd, and Clapton became one of rock music's most famous love stories. Despite the personal problems, Harrison and Clapton managed to stay close friends for decades, an almost unbelievable example of George's forgiving nature. By 1977, George and Patty's marriage had come to an end, and they divorced peacefully. Both would later describe their time together as filled with love and lessons. George's spirituality had given him a deep understanding of letting go and showing compassion, which helped him handle the separation with grace. Patty later admitted that she still had great love for him, and that their years together had deeply shaped her life. Not long after his divorce, George's life entered a new chapter when he met Olivia Arias, a Mexican-American who worked at A&M Records. Their connection was instant, but unlike his previous marriage, this relationship was based on maturity, mutual respect, and shared spiritual values. Olivia was warm, down-to-earth, and supportive, qualities that matched George's thoughtful and sometimes private nature. They married in 1978, just months after the birth of their son, Donnie Harrison. With Olivia, George found the peace and home, stability that had been missing from his life for so long. Together, they created a peaceful life at Friar Park, his huge estate in Henley-on-Thames. Olivia stood by George through every challenge: his battles with the press, the pressures of fame, his musical projects, and even the terrifying 1999 home invasion during which an intruder stabbed George multiple times. Olivia's quick thinking and bravery helped save his life that night. Their bond only got stronger after the attack, and she remained his constant source of strength as he faced his final battle with cancer years later. When George Harrison passed away in November 2001, Olivia was by his side holding his hand. She later spoke beautifully of his peaceful passing, saying that George left this world as he lived in love and light. Their marriage, which had lasted for more than 2 decades, became one of rock's rare examples of lasting devotion and spiritual partnership. During the same time that Lewis Collins was trying out different music alongside Mike McCartney, Paul McCartney's younger brother and a talented performer in his own right, the Liverpool scene was bubbling with youthful ambition, rivalries, and creative energy. Collins, later known to millions for his role as Bodie in The Professionals, was at that time still looking for his artistic identity. He was deeply involved in the exciting Merseyside music culture of the early 1960s, when hundreds of young musicians were performing every night in clubs like the Cavern and the Iron Door, dreaming of fame. It was in this world that fate briefly brought Collins and the Beatles together, a what-if moment that could have changed the path of British pop history. At the time, Pete Best, the original drummer for the Beatles, had been kicked out of the group, and Paul McCartney was looking for a replacement who could bring stability and style to the band's changing sound. According to stories later confirmed by those close to the Liverpool scene, Mike McCartney had been impressed by Collins's sense of rhythm and his natural charm on stage. He suggested his friend to his older brother as a possible choice for the empty drum seat. Lewis had great timing both musically and personally, George Harrison later said in an interview years later. He had that natural confide. He wasn't just a drummer, Harrison remembered. He had a real feel for melody, for structure. You could tell he understood music beyond just keeping time. Some people thought he might end up as a songwriter or lead singer in his own right. Harrison also mentioned how Collins's stage confidence would later move naturally into his acting career. When I saw him years later in the professionals, I thought that's the same guy I used to see walking confidently into gigs in Liverpool. He had that same energy, that same kind of cool toughness. He could have fit in with us musically, but he found his own stage instead. For George, there was a sense of respect in the way Collins followed his own path. Even when that meant walking away from what could have been a huge opportunity. You can't second-guess destiny, Harrison thought. Everyone who ever came through the Beatles circle was there for a reason, even if they didn't stay. Lewis might have been one of those people. Maybe the universe just pushed him towards something else. The Liverpool scene was filled with stories like this, of musicians who almost became part of the biggest band in history, and of others who, like Collins, went on to fame through other creative paths. George Harrison, always philosophical, saw such moments as part of the beautiful unpredictability of life. I always thought the Beatles' story wasn't just about the four of us, he once said. It was about all the people around us who shaped what we became. The friends, the rivals, the ones who said no, and the ones who said yes. Lewis was one of those names that came up back then, and you can't help but smile when you think of what might have been. In the end, Lewis Collins's brief connection with the Beatles became one of those interesting footnotes in rock history, a reminder of how close he came to joining the greatest band of all time. For George Harrison, it was also proof of Collins's individuality and quiet determination. He had his own rhythm, his own beat, Harrison concluded, and that's something every true artist understands. You've got to follow your own tempo, not someone else's. A lifelong smoker, Harrison died of cancer in 2001 at the age of 58, 2 years after surviving a knife attack by an intruder at his home.